Tonight, what surfaced at 11:23 Greenwich Mean Time marks the most damaging intelligence breach in Russian government history. Good evening. Picture this scene unfolding across newsrooms globally. Encrypted files appearing simultaneously on secure servers accessed by major intelligence agencies and investigative journalism outlets. Files containing over 40 hours of audio recordings from inside the Kremlin's most secure facilities. Not peripheral meetings, not junior officials discussing routine business. These are recordings of Putin's inner circle, his security council, his most trusted advisors, captured over the past 8 months during moments they believe were completely private. And what those recordings reveal is extraordinary. Panic, doubt, blame, open talk of military collapse, admission that the war is lost, arguments over how to conceal the true scale of casualties from the Russian public, and debates about whether Putin himself has lost touch with reality. Think about that. For 22 months, the world has witnessed this war through official Russian statements claiming victory is inevitable. Ukrainian resistance is crumbling and Western support is fading. But these recordings expose what Putin's inner circle actually believes when the cameras are off and denials are unnecessary. They believe Russia is losing. They believe the economic toll is unsustainable. They believe Putin has led Russia into strategic disaster, and they're terrified to tell him. This isn't about leaked documents requiring interpretation. These are voices, actual audio of Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu admitting to colleagues that Russian casualties exceed 390,000. Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, stating that Ukraine's counteroffensive capabilities are growing while Russian forces deteriorate. FSB Director Alexander Bortnikov warning that domestic unrest is spreading beyond what security services can manage. These men speaking with the kind of candor that only emerges when people think no outsider will ever hear them. And yet, someone was listening. Someone with access to the Kremlin's most secure rooms was recording everything. And tonight, that someone has delivered those recordings to the world. Let me take you back to understand why this breach is so devastating. Because the history of Russian security services rests on one unshakable principle. The Kremlin is impenetrable. From Stalin's NKVD through various purges, the KGB's Cold War dominance, to the modern FSB under Putin's direct control, Russian security doctrine has always insisted that the leadership's inner deliberations remain utterly secret. That's not just operational security, it's the bedrock of authoritarian power. When the public doesn't know what leaders truly believe, that is, leaders can maintain narratives disconnected from reality. They can declare victory while losing wars. They can promise prosperity while the economy implodes. They can project strength while secretly fearing their own people. That gap between public story and private truth is how authoritarian regimes survive catastrophic policy failures for years, even decades. As long as the public remains in the dark about what leadership actually thinks, the regime controls the national narrative and thus its political legitimacy. But tonight, that control is shattered beyond repair. The leaked recordings span from March 2024 through November 2024. 8 months of private discussions among Putin's closest circle about war strategy, economic viability, and regime survival. Western intelligence agencies analyzing the material have confirmed its authenticity through multiple independent technical methods. Voice analysis using biometric matching confirms the speakers align with known recordings. Background acoustics and ambient sounds match verified security protocols for Kremlin facilities. References to specific classified details in the recordings have been cross-checked against other intelligence sources and verified. Metadata embedded in the audio files points to recording equipment consistent with Russian government security systems. Here's the first key insight. When intelligence services authenticate leaked recordings through multiple technical channels, they're not just verifying audio quality. They're confirming either that someone inside Putin's inner circle deliberately betrayed him, or that Russian security has been thoroughly compromised by foreign intelligence. Either scenario is utterly catastrophic for Putin's authority. And yet, what makes this breach even more disturbing is what the recordings reveal about how Putin's government actually operates. These aren't These are recordings of terrified officials telling each other truths they dare not speak to Putin, then walking into meetings with him and lying about military realities, economic conditions, and domestic stability. The chasm between what Putin's advisors know and what they tell him is so vast, It explains every disastrous decision Russia has made in this war. Which brings us to the specific excerpts that have emerged, because the content is devastating. Let me walk you through the most consequential moments. Recording dated April 14th, 2024. Location identified as a secure conference room in the Kremlin's Senate building. Voices identified as Defense Minister Shoigu, Chief of General Staff Gerasimov, and 3 deputy defense ministers. The conversation takes place 30 minutes before a scheduled meeting with Putin. Shoigu's voice, tired, strained. The casualty figures we're giving him are fiction. He asked for total losses yesterday. I said 47,000 dead, the actual number from our own. At 78,000 missing, presumed dead. That doesn't include wounded who'll never return to service. If we told him the real number, he'd fire us all. Gerasimov responds, if we're fired, we're the lucky ones. Look what happened to Prigozhin. He told Putin the truth about Bakhmut, and 2 months later, his plane exploded. We tell Putin what he wants to hear, or we don't survive. Think about that. Here's the second key insight. When the defense minister and chief of general staff are falsifying casualty numbers to their own president by a factor of 7, out of fear of assassination, you're not looking at a government. You're looking at a death cult where speaking truth means execution. And the April recording grows even more damning. One deputy minister, identified via voice analysis as Colonel General Mikhail Mizintsev, states, the offensive capability we reported to him doesn't exist. We told him we have 150,000 trained reserves ready for deployment. We have 43,000 and most are gone. Shoigu's reply is chilling. He believes what we tell him because he wants to believe it. He's built a reality where Russia is winning, where one more push breaks Ukrainian resistance, where the West is about to abandon Kiev. Our job is to preserve that illusion in his mind while dealing with the real world where we're losing. That recording, authenticated by 3 separate intelligence agencies, reveals that Putin has been systematically misled by his own military leadership on fundamental war realities. He doesn't know the true death toll. He doesn't know the actual state of Russian military readiness. He's making strategic choices based on fabricated data provided by advisors too afraid to speak honestly. Now, consider the recordings that expose economic panic, because the military lies are only part of the story. Recording dated July 22nd, 2024. Voices identified as Finance Minister Anton Siluanov, Central Bank Governor Elvira Nabiullina, and Presidential Aide Maxim Oreshkin. Topic: Russia's economic sustainability. Siluanov opens. The budget deficit this year will exceed 8 trillion rubles, nearly 3 times our projection. Military spending consumes 38% of the federal budget, but the real figure is closer to 55% when you add classified programs and support costs. We're draining the National Wealth Fund at a pace that gives us 18 months before it's gone. Nabiullina's response reveals the depth of the crisis. Inflation is running at 23% in real terms. We report 7% publicly, but food prices are up 41% year over year. Fuel costs have risen 38%. The ruble has lost 34% of its value against tradable currencies. Sanctions have cut off 60% of our former international trade. We're propping up the economy with reserves. But those reserves won't last. Think about that. Here's the third key insight. Putin's economic team tells him inflation is under control at 7%, while privately admitting it's 23% and climbing. They claim budget stability, while knowing the National Wealth Fund will be exhausted in 18 months. The economic house of cards funding Russia's war effort is collapsing, and Putin apparently has no idea. And the most damning exchange comes when Oreshkin raises the unthinkable. At some point, he needs to understand the economic reality. We can't sustain military operations at this level indefinitely. The choice is to slash military spending or face economic collapse within 2 years. Siluanov's reply captures the paralyzing fear. You want to tell Putin we can't afford to keep fighting? You want to be the one who explains his predictions of Western economic collapse were wrong? And Russia is the one in crisis? Go ahead. I'll attend your funeral. That July exchange shows Putin's economic advisors know Russia faces imminent economic implosion, but choose that outcome over the personal risk of telling Putin an unwelcome truth. Now, let's turn to the recordings exposing domestic security fears, perhaps the most explosive of all. Recording, dated September 9th, 2024. Voices identified as FSB Director Alexander Bortnikov, Interior Minister Vladimir Kolokoltsev, and National Guard Commander Viktor Zolotov. Bortnikov begins with an assessment that contradicts every public claim about domestic calm. We're tracking 127 active protest movements across 40 regions, not just Moscow and St. Petersburg. Industrial cities where military families demand answers about missing soldiers. Rural areas where draft resistance has turned violent. Last month, 11 attacks on recruitment offices. 3 officers killed. Kolikoltsev adds grim detail. Desertion rates have jumped 340% since January. We've arrested over 2,000 soldiers who fled Ukraine this year. Just the ones we caught. Estimates suggest 15,000 have vanished into the population or fled abroad. In Dagestan last month, 4,000 people surrounded a recruitment office and forced it to shut. We deployed riot police with armored vehicles. Think about that. Here's the 4th key insight. While state media broadcasts staged rallies backing the war, Putin's top security officials privately report mass protests by military families, thousands of deserters, and entire regions violently resisting conscription. And the most haunting moment comes when Zolotov asks, "At what point do we tell the president the domestic situation is slipping beyond our control? We can manage city protests and isolated resistance, but if the economy keeps worsening and casualties keep rising, we could face unrest we can't suppress." Ordnikov's reply is telling. We tell him everything's under control. We say protests are limited. We stress public support for the war and trust in his leadership, because the moment we admit the truth, he'll question our competence. And questioning our competence means replacement. And given how he's handled recent failures, replacement might be the best-case scenario. Now, consider Moscow's reaction to these leaks, because what's happening in the Kremlin tonight reveals high-level panic. As of 1800 Moscow time, 7 hours after the recordings began spreading, Putin called an emergency Security Council meeting. It began at 15:30 and reportedly lasted over 4 hours, including every official whose voice appears in the leaks. No official statement has been issued. But sources with indirect Kremlin access describe an atmosphere of paranoia and mutual accusation. Here's the 5th key insight, the emotional core of this moment. Putin faces 2 simultaneous crises. The obvious one, but the deeper crisis. Putin doesn't know who betrayed him. Was it someone in the room making secret recordings? Was it a Russian security failure allowing external penetration? Was it a foreign intelligence operation so advanced it breached the Kremlin's most secure spaces? Not knowing the source means not knowing whom to trust, and for an autocrat whose power depends on a circle of unquestionably loyal subordinates, that uncertainty is an existential threat. Western intelligence, monitoring Russian comms reports immediate, sweeping security upgrades. FSB counterintelligence has launched a massive probe. Every person with access to these conversations is under surveillance. Kremlin electronic systems are being dismantled and rebuilt. The investigation's intensity confirms Russian leadership understands this wasn't a minor leak. It was a catastrophic breach of their most protected communications. Yet, what makes this psychologically devastating is that the investigation itself, the fragile trust that enabled even dishonest coordination, like the conversations in the recordings, is shattered. From now on, every discussion happens with the awareness that someone might be recording, reporting to investigators, or weaponizing statements as proof of disloyalty. That environment kills the coordination authoritarian regimes need to function. Even if the source is eventually found, internal trust is permanently broken. Let me explain why this goes beyond embarrassment and becomes an unsolvable strategic dilemma. These recordings don't just show Putin being lied to by subordinates avoiding punishment. They reveal that Putin has built a system where lying to him is the only rational survival strategy for anyone in his government. Consider the calculus facing any Russian official after hearing these tapes. Tell Putin the truth about military losses? Risk being blamed and removed, or worse. Admit economic collapse. Be accused of defeatism and incompetence. Report. The rational choice for anyone wanting to survive is to lie, to insist everything is on track, victory is inevitable, and problems are manageable. That dynamic creates what systems theorists call a doom loop. Putin makes decisions based on false data. Those decisions fail because they're rooted in fiction. Failures mount, increasing pressure to tell the truth. But truth-telling means personal risk, so officials keep lying. Putin receives ever more fictional assessments, justifying continued failed policies, while Russia slides toward catastrophe. Think about that. Here's the sixth key insight. When authoritarian leaders create environments where truth-telling is punished and lying is rewarded, they guarantee they'll never receive the accurate information needed for sound strategy. And that guarantee means their regimes are doomed to catastrophic failure, regardless of external pressure. But there's something even deeper in these recordings. They expose the utter emptiness of Russia. Official statements speak of careful planning and inevitable victory. State media shows confident leaders managing complex operations. But these recordings reveal a different reality. Behind the facade, Putin's inner circle is terrified, confused, and incapable of basic honesty. They're not executing a grand strategy. They're trapped in a nightmare, knowing they're losing, but unable to admit it. They're not confidently steering Russia through crisis. They're desperately maintaining lies as the country collapses. That revelation doesn't just weaken Putin, it undermines the entire legitimacy of authoritarian models that claim superior decision-making through centralized control. Where does this stand right now? As of 2000 Moscow time, 9 hours after the initial leak, the recordings have been downloaded millions of times globally. Russian-language versions are spreading through social media despite government blocks. Exiled Russian journalists are broadcasting translated excerpts. Western media are publishing detailed analyses with transcripts and timestamps. The information cannot be contained, and Putin faces impossible response options. Option 1. Acknowledge the recordings are real, but claim they're taken out of context. But that confirms his inner circle has been systematically deceiving him. It validates that casualty counts, economic data, and security reports are all fabrications. Every Russian citizen hearing these tapes knows their government has lied comprehensively. Option 2. Claim the recordings are Western forgeries. But Western agencies have already released technical proofs, voice biometrics, acoustic signatures, background sounds, classified references, all confirming authenticity. The forgery claim collapses under scrutiny, making Putin look both dishonest and incompetent. Option 3. Admit authenticity and purge everyone on the recordings. But that means firing his defense minister, general staff chief, finance minister, FSB director, the E. Yes, you're not facing a manageable problem. You're witnessing the start of systemic collapse, and Putin's options are even more constrained, because the recordings show he can't trust the very people who normally manage such a crisis. The FSB is supposed to investigate breaches, but its director is on tape admitting he lies about unrest. The presidential administration coordinates messaging, but its officials discuss hiding economic truth. The defense ministry provides military assessments, but those are exposed as pure fiction. Putin has no one he can rely on to tell him what's really happening, or how to respond. Yet here's the most haunting possibility intelligence analysts are weighing tonight. What if the leak didn't come from outside at all? What if someone inside Putin's inner circle deliberately released these recordings? Because they've concluded Putin is driving Russia to ruin, and the only way to stop him is to destroy his authority so thoroughly that he can be removed. The recordings span 8 months, suggesting systematic documentation. Audio quality is pristine, consistent with insider access, not external surveillance. The selected excerpts maximize damage to Putin while exposing systemic deception by his team. The timing, amid Ukraine's strengthening position and Russia's deepening economic crisis, suggests strategic intent to maximize impact. Think about that. Here's the 8th key insight. If Putin's own inner circle has turned against him and is using intelligence leaks to dismantle his authority, then Russia is entering the early phase of a regime crisis. And regime crisis in a nuclear-armed state creates dangers that extend far beyond its borders. Because the pattern in these recordings, terrified officials lying to keep their jobs while knowing the state is failing, is precisely the pattern that precedes revolutionary moments. When everyone knows the system is broken but pretends it's working, because honesty brings punishment, pressure builds. But they can't speak openly, because Putin has made honesty impossible. That tension cannot last forever. Eventually, reality forces acknowledgement. And when it does, authoritarian systems that have suppressed truth collapse with shocking speed, as everyone simultaneously stops pretending the lies are real. So what does this mean for those watching tonight, trying to grasp what comes next for Russia and what it says about authoritarian governance globally? Because these recordings aren't just about embarrassing Putin or scoring propaganda points. They reveal fundamental truths about how authoritarian systems fail and why that failure is almost structurally inevitable. For decades, scholars have debated whether authoritarian rule offers advantages over democracy in crisis response, arguing that autocracies can act quickly, avoid debate, and maintain focus without democratic constraints. But these recordings expose the fatal flaw that nullifies all theoretical advantages. Authoritarian systems that punish truth-telling inevitably ensure leaders make decisions based on fiction, not reality. Putin may genuinely not know Russia has lost nearly 400,000 soldiers. He may truly believe inflation is under control and budgets are sustainable. He might sincerely think protests are minor, not because he's foolish, but because his advisors are rationally choosing survival over honesty. And when leaders base strategy on comprehensive lies from every level of government, catastrophic outcomes are guaranteed. Think about that. And yet, here's what should give democratic societies both reassurance and concern. Reassurance, because these recordings prove authoritarian systems have structural weaknesses that outweigh any short-term efficiency. Systems that suppress truth eventually crash into reality. Leaders who punish honesty eventually lose wars they thought they were winning. That matters. It shows democratic transparency, for all its messiness, produces better long-term outcomes than authoritarian secrecy. But concern, because regime collapse in a nuclear-armed state is dangerous for everyone. These recordings suggest Putin may be so disconnected from reality that he can't make rational decisions about negotiation, withdrawal, or recognizing that continuing the war serves no Russian interest. If he believes Russia is winning, while it's actually losing catastrophically, he has no incentive to seek peace. And a leader making strategic choices based on lies is a leader who might escalate toward catastrophe. You can welcome the exposure of Putin's deceptions and the unraveling of his authority from within. But you can't ignore that authoritarian collapse is unpredictable and perilous. You can take satisfaction that his inner circle's cowardice is now public. But you can't pretend that chaos these revelations unleash won't ripple beyond Russia's place. Borders. You can recognize these recordings validate democratic governance over authoritarian models. But you can't deny that transitions, especially in nuclear states, carry risks that demand careful global management. Tonight, somewhere in the Kremlin, Putin is confronting a brutal truth. His inner circle has systematically lied to him about everything that matters. His military leaders lied about casualties and capabilities. His economic team lied about sustainability and inflation. His security chiefs lied about domestic control. And someone, either from within that circle or via unprecedented intelligence penetration, reported it all and gave it to the world. This isn't just another wartime scandal. It's the exposure of systemic failure at the heart of authoritarian rule. The failure that arises when punishing truth creates incentives for lies so pervasive that leadership becomes completely detached from reality, making rational decision-making impossible. What happens next? Will Putin purge his circle and create a leadership vacuum? Will he keep them and confirm he governs on lies? Will someone in the Russian elite use this crisis to move against him? Will internal dysfunction combine with external pressure to force regime change? Those answers will come in the days and weeks ahead. But one thing is certain tonight. The extraordinary courage of whoever recorded and leaked these conversations has exposed the hollow core of Putin's regime. The resilience of truth, no matter how fiercely it's suppressed, has been demonstrated once more. And the haunting reality that authoritarian leaders who build systems where truth means death eventually become so isolated from reality that they lead their nations to ruin is now proven with audio evidence that cannot be denied. That's what emerged at 11:23 Greenwich Mean Time, when 40 hours of recordings from inside Putin's inner circle were delivered to the world. That's what those recordings reveal: systematic debt.